Hi, I'm Evie Kimsing, editor of identityweek.net. I'm joined by Ian Glazer now, who's the founder and president of IDPro. Good afternoon to you, Ian. How does IDPro promote collaboration between service providers and the industry?
Yeah, so IDPro is the Professional Association for Digital Identity Management. So we're an organization really focused on helping practitioners be better practitioners. In that way, we sort of act as a bridge because we actually provide a safe space for practitioners to ask questions of their peers and actually of industry. And so we have a really interesting and collaborative space where people can come together and throw out any sort of question. I've got this challenge with MFA, or I'm struggling with governance. And the response you get, not because people are incented to do so, only other than out of the goodness of their heart to give back, is really amazing. We also do things like provide a body of knowledge, which is a vendor-neutral way of approaching a subject matter, which has really been lacking in the identity management industry. And we'll do things like I'm talking about tomorrow, which is providing windows into the industry in terms of what are the major trends that are shaping it.
And what identity challenges then come up through that forum, which are being discussed collectively?
Yeah, so there is what we see every year is when we do this, we do a skills, programs, and diversity study. And so we're really asking not only questions about you as a practitioner and how you came up in the industry, but also what's important to you as an individual. Like, what do you want to learn about? What would be helpful for you? And then from a perspective of your employer, the industry you work in, what do you think its priorities are? And one of the things that happens every single year is that the responses to the priorities for the institution, the organization, and the responses for individuals are rarely aligned. So what we hear organizations saying our priorities are authentication and authorization, governance, IDAS, and customer identity management. I think just about in that order. But if you look at the individual side, it's completely different. They're interested in wallets, verifiable credentials, API security, a little bit of authentication because there's a big market for it, but they're not aligned. And I think that's a really interesting thing where we hear on one hand institutions saying we have got to get better about authentication, and at the same time we see practitioners saying like, yeah, most of us already have experience in it. In fact, we know that about 83% of our respondents have experience in authentication, so it's not super interesting, but it's getting reinvigorated, I think, and that is actually really interesting.
Well, this brings me into my next question. Which future identity use cases are going to kind of evolve more than others?
Well, I think the shape of what future solutions and use cases need to look like are ones that are first equitable. Everyone has to engage in identity, and increasingly everyone has to engage in digital identity. However, a lot of our solutions that are here in this moment now either require you carry around that $1,000 supercomputer that we all have in our pockets in the form of a mobile phone, or it requires you to buy specialized hardware. It may only be $50 for, say, a USB security stick, but it's still an outlay. And that in and of itself is exclusive. So the first thing is it's got to be inclusive. It's got to work for all peoples everywhere. The second thing is it's got to be really fit for purpose. There is a lot of identity-related technologies and ceremonies, which we all engage with, which frankly are not the easiest to do so. And they're not the most self-explanatory, and they're not the most transparent. If we don't fix that now, when we get to a state of thinking about how do people identify themselves, not just in digital space, but in, say, a metaverse-type environment, these problems only compound. So we've got to have fit for purpose and really human-centered design around these solutions. The individuals will tell us in some regards, either by disengagement or by outright feedback, negative, when this goes wrong. The problem is when there isn't an opportunity to not engage. There isn't an opportunity for an individual to say, I'm struggling with this. Either I have different kinds of needs, or for my use case and who I am, I can't engage in this matter. The problem is those voices aren't always heard, and that's something that's really concerning to me.
Should we be adopting an identity approach which uses readily available technologies like blockchain like government-issued documents, digital documents, and smartphones?
Readily available is a very interesting selection of phrase, because the next three things you said, I would argue, are not always readily available. Not for everyone, not globally. And so, readily available? Yes, but at the same time, we ought to take a very strong look at what that actually means. Does that mean for a certain socioeconomic class, a certain set of countries? Are those exclusive to one country? That's not readily available. So yeah, absolutely. It has to be, to my earlier point, equitable. Everyone's got to be engaged and be able to engage in these systems. Now, I think what we've clearly seen over the last couple of years, especially through the pandemic, is the need for stronger authentication. It's never been greater. But that the form factors that takes are starting to change, which is actually a really positive thing. We're getting close to that magical moment where it just knows it's me. But to get there right now, what does that require? A very expensive piece of computing, a very expensive mobile phone. That's not a global solution. And so until we can start to bring the overall cost of engagement down, we're leaving people out of the services and goods, being social services or private sector, that are available to them, and yet we put a bar of technology in the way.
It's been great to talk to you and hear that insight. Have you got a session tomorrow?
In fact, I've got two. I've got one where I'm on a panel with some amazing folks to talk about multi-factor authentication and just the modern authentication schemes and how people are challenged with them, succeeding, some of their stories. And then at the end of the day, I get to talk about a little bit about what IDPro does in terms of its skills survey that I mentioned earlier. So I'm going to be sharing some of the results of what we saw in this year's survey and some observations from that. So I'm super excited to be back tomorrow.
So you're getting that feedback from users?
Absolutely. Getting feedback from our practitioners, the people that are trying to make it work.
Thank you so much, Ian.
Happy to be here.